Hi, everybody. I'm going to make a video going over some of the questions from the Jeopardy. For this video, I will end up going over a decent amount of them, but I won't go over all of them. So I try to go over one of each type, and you can apply the part of the video to other questions if you need it. So the questions I'm going to go over are 400 C and D for converting, 400 A, B, and D for both are adding, subtracting, and multiplying and dividing rational numbers. And then I'm also going to go over um, question number 1000 for our dividing rational numbers 2. And then order of operations will be 600, 800, and 1000. I never go over the final Jeopardy because usually those types of questions will be similar to what your extra credit type question would be. All right, so let's go ahead and go through some of these questions. All right, so for this question number 400C, you're asked to convert. So since it's given to us as a fraction, we want to rewrite it as a decimal. And one of the things I would suggest that you do is for these questions for converting, to make it a little bit easier for you, do rewrite this as a mixed number because we'll know what our whole number will be for our problem to start with. And 18 can go into 23 two whole times. And then we would do 8 times 2 is 16. So 23 minus 16 will give me 7. So it can be rewritten as 2 and 7/8. So right away, since I see it's 2 and 7/8, I know that my final answer is going to be 2 point something. And remember, one of the ways that we can do this is if we can manipulate our 8 into 100, then we can easily just get our decimal there. And even though you might not think that 8 can go into 100, you can manipulate it in multiple ways. You can divide it first and then multiply. It's just whatever you do, make sure you're doing it to the numerator as well. But we're not going to go through that method. We're just going to go through the one that works every single time. That's going to be, this means 7 divided by 8 is what we can think about it as when we have our fraction. So we can just go ahead and divide. Well, 8 can't go into 7. So we have our 0, and that means we need to move to all those infinite zeros beyond that 7. So since I added the decimal there, I need to add the decimal there as well. Then I ask, how many times can 8 go into 70? Well, it goes into 8 times, so we subtract the 64, which is 8 times 8. So 70 minus 64 gives me 6. And then I'm going to go ahead and add another 0 because there's infinite number of zeros there and bring that down. And I'm going to ask myself, okay, well, now how many times does 8 go into 60? And it goes into it 7 times. And that's 7 times 8 is 56. So when we subtract, we get 4. And now I'm going to add that 0 again and bring it down. And now how many times does 8 go into 40? And this goes into it 5 times with no remainder. So that means that my answer for 7 over 8 is 0.875. But since we rewrote it as a mixed number, I know it's 2.875. And that will be our final answer. All right, so for this problem, it says convert negative 6.12. And once again, I know that this is a decimal written, so I'm going to convert it to be a fraction. So once again, I see it's negative 6 point something, so I know that my answer right away can be negative 6, and then I can just rewrite it as a mixed number. So I can just focus on the decimal of 0.12. And then remember, when we're converting a decimal to a fraction, we need to know our place value name. So it's our tenths and our hundredths. So that means that we have 12 out of 100. And then we will look here to reduce as much as we can. And I'm going to go through this a little bit longer. So if you can see or know what number goes into the largest number that goes into 12 and 100, just divide by that right away. But since I see that they're both even, I can divide both by 2. So I get 6 over 50. And then once again, I see that they're both even, so I can continue to go and divide by 2 again. And that will then give me 3 over 25. And that can't reduce anymore. So our answer for negative 6.12 as a fraction is negative 6 and 3/25. And that will be our final answer. All right, so for this next question, we're just practicing going over our adding, subtracting. So the first thing I look, well, let me write this down. So it's negative 1,500, negative 1,521 minus 389. So I look and see, okay, both of my signs are negative. So when we're adding or subtracting, when our signs are the same, we simply just treat them as if they're positive numbers and we add them. So we can use the method and way that you guys have learned in the past. 1 plus 9 is 10, so I can carry the 1. 2 plus 8 is 10, plus 1 is 11. So I'll put the 1 down and carry that 1, which represents actually 100 at that point. 5 plus 3 is 8, plus 1 is 9. And then we just have 1 plus 0, which is 1. So we add it like we normally do, but remember, since they were both negatives, that means that we started in a negative on our number line and we went further left, which means we went further into the negative. So the answer is negative 1,910. All right, so for this problem, we're just mainly practicing our signs. So remember, when we are 5 over 8 minus a negative 15 over 12, this actually turns to plus. So this then becomes 5 over 8 plus 15 over 12. And now I'm going to go through this question without simplifying my fraction first, which in this problem you could, and it actually would make it a little bit easier. But I wanted to just kind of practice going over finding common denominators between 8 and 12. So if we're trying to add these, we can't as is because 8 and 12 are not the same. Our fractions are not broken up in the same amount of pieces. So to do this, I need to get common denominator. And remember, it's easier if we can find our least common denominator. If you can't find your least common denominator, it's not the end of the world, but you're just going to have to reduce at the end. All right, so to find our least common denominator, we can take our smallest denominator, which is 8, and write out all of its multiples, constantly asking, can the other denominator divide evenly into it? 12 cannot go into 8, 12 cannot go into 16, but 12 can go into 24. So that tells me that my least common denominator is 24. Then I need to ask myself, well, 8 times what gives me 24? And that would be 3. So I multiply it by 3 over 3. And remember, we do 3 over 3 because 3 over 3 is equal to 1. And 1 times any number is always that number. So we're not changing the value of it. We're just rewriting it. Then I ask myself, 12 times what gives me 24? And that's 2. So I will need to multiply that fraction by 2 over 2. And once I do this part, now I just need to just go ahead and multiply. So I get 15 over 24 plus 30 over 24. And I'm going to go ahead and add these together, which is then going to give me 45 over 24. But once we add our fractions, we always need to see, can they reduce? And both of these are divisible by 3. So I'm going to divide both of these by 3. 45 divided by 3 is 15. And 24 divided by 3 is 8. So our final answer is 15 over 8. All right, so now this question here, 400D, we have negative 175.0345 plus 105.77. So remember, when our signs are different, we look at both numbers as if they are positive. And so we now look at this number as 175.0345 and 105.77. And after we look at them as both positive numbers, we always do our larger number minus our smaller number. So this one, we will do 175.0345 minus, now remember, when we're subtracting or adding decimals, we have to line our decimals up. So we can't put the 7 under that 4 5. They need to go in the same place value. And anything that's not written here, we can just assume, or not assume, we can treat them as zeros. There's an infinite number of zeros after. So now let's go ahead and use our normal method that we know how to subtract. Well, 5 minus 0 is 5. 4 minus 0 is 4. We can't do 3 minus 7, and there's nothing for me to borrow to 0, so I'm going to borrow from this 5, and that will give me 10, but then I'll borrow 1 to give me 13, and now 13 minus 7 is 6. 9 minus 7 is 2. We're now crossing over that decimal, so our decimal will go there. We can't do 4 minus 5, so I'm going to borrow and do 14 minus 5, which is then going to give me 9. And 6 minus 0 is 6. 1 minus 1 is 0. So we know our number is 69.2645. And to figure out our sign, we got to go back to our larger number and see, well, what was its sign? And since it was negative, our final answer needs to be negative. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next question. All right, so for this question, we have 5.217 times 16.14. And remember, when we're multiplying with decimals, we can just get rid of them as long as if we keep track of how many decimal place values we had. So we have 3 in this decimal, in this number, and 2 here. So we have a total of 5. And then we can just rewrite these numbers without the decimals. I'm going to write this off to the side because we need a little bit of room for this one. So 5217 times 1614. And as long as if I remember the decimals I took away, I can just add them at the end. And now we just multiply this like you would have learned years and years ago. 4 times 7 is 28, so we carried a 2. 4 times 1 plus 2 is 6. 4 times 2 is 8, and 5 times 4 is 20. Now I'm going to move on to my next value, my 1. I'm now timesing 10 by everything. And remember, when we multiply any number by 10, any whole number by 10, the smallest that number can be is 10. So because of that, we need to put our place value, our 0, because we cannot get any 1s at that point. And now I'm going to multiply 1 times 7, 1 times 1, 1 times 2, and 1 times 5. Now when I move on to my hundredths, my 600, same thing. When I multiply any whole number by 100, the smallest it could be is 100. So that's why I'm putting those 2 zeros, because the next number will be 100, 200, whatever it may be. But the smallest it could be is 100. So now we do 6 times 7, which is going to be 42. So I put my 2 and I carry that 4 over, which is representing thousands. 6 times 1 plus 4 is 10. So I put the 0 and carry the 1. 6 times 2 plus 1 is 13. And 5 times 6 plus 1 is 31. All right. I'm erasing these just so I don't have space, but I would suggest that you make sure that you are not mistaken when you carry over. So either erase or use different colors. Now I'm doing 1,000. So I need to go ahead and write my 3 zeros. And I'm multiplying 1 by 7, 1 by 1, 1 by 2, and 1 by 5. And I'm going to add down. We have 8. 6 plus 7 is 13. Carry to 1. 8 plus 1 plus 1 plus 2 is 12. Carry to 1. Then we have 10. Carry to 1. We have 7, 8, 11, and 12. Carry to 1. We have 4 and 8. But what we need to remember is our number of decimal places. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So our final answer would be 84.20238. All right, let's move on to the next question. All right, so for this one, we're multiplying or dividing rational numbers. And we have negative 23 times negative 12. So when we see different signs, I see I had 2 negatives. I like to think about what my answer is going to be first. A negative times a negative, I know is going to be positive. So I'm going to do something to make sure I remember that this is giving me a positive number. And then I'm just going to go ahead and multiply 23 times 12. And since I know what the sign is going to be at the end, I don't need to worry about my signs while I'm doing my work. 2 times 3 is 6. 2 times 2 is 4. I put my 0 for my placeholder of 10. And 1 times 3 and 1 times 2. I will then go ahead and add down. So it gives me 276. And then from there, I know my answer is positive, so I can just go ahead and just write it as a positive 276. All right, so our next question, we have negative 1.95 divided by negative 0.15. Once again, I see I have negatives. Well, a negative divided by negative is going to give me a positive as my answer. So when I do this, I'm not going to worry about the signs. I'm just going to do it as if they're positive and think about the sign at the end. So I'm doing 1.95 divided by 0.15. Remember, when we're dividing, we don't want to divide by any numbers that are decimals. So I'm going to move this decimal place over 2 times. And whenever I move my decimal place over, I had to do it with the number I'm dividing into as well. So this can be rewritten as 195 divided by 15. And remember, we're not just moving these decimal places because we feel like it. What we're doing is multiplying each number here by 100. And as long as if we're multiplying all of our numbers by the same value, it's not going to change our truth statement. And we can manipulate our numbers so we can work with a problem that's easier for us that we're used to seeing. I'm going to go ahead and just erase this so I have more space. Now we're just going to divide. 15 goes into 19 one time. 1 times 15 is 15. We subtract, bring down that remaining number of 5, and 15 goes into 45 3 times. So our final answer is 13. When we're doing division, we don't need to worry about decimals like we do with multiplying where we're counting over, because wherever our decimal falls in our number, that's where it would fall in our answer as well. All right, that's it for this question. All right, this question, there's multiple ways you can do it, but just because the way that we talk about things, I don't want to show you other methods or show you other ways in case I might confuse people. So I'm just going to go through this in one particular way. But same thing as before. I see I have 1, 2, 3, 4 negatives. So even number of negatives is going to turn my answer to positive. So I'm not going to worry about my signs anymore, and I'm just going to go ahead and work through these problems as if they're all positive, and I know my answer is going to be positive at the end anyway. Now, this is all just division. If it was multiplying, dividing, remember, we go left to right. So I'm just going to go ahead and go left to right as we answer this. So the first number I'll do is 3 over 5 divided by 9 over 20. And we know our rule when we divide by a fraction is we keep, change, flip. Yeah, that's the action. Everybody knows how we're dividing fractions. And then I'm going to reduce. 3 goes into 3 once, 3 goes into 9 3 times, 5 goes into 5 once, and 5 goes into 24 times. So now I'm left with 4 over 3. Same thing, I'm now going to bring down my next fraction. So since it's divided by negative 10 over 21, I'm forgetting my signs because I already know my answer is positive. And I'm just in one step, I'm going to keep change to multiplying, and I'm going to flip to 21 over 10. And then from here, 3 goes into 21 7 times, and 3 goes into 3 once. 2 goes into 4 twice, and 2 goes into 10 5 times. So now I'm left with 14 over 5. once again, I'm going to bring down my last fraction, but I'm going to flip it because we're going to multiply. So 45 over 32. And 5 goes into 5 once, and it goes into 45 9 times. 2 goes into 14 7 times, and 2 goes into 32 16 times. There's no other number that we can go ahead and reduce this by. So we will just multiply. 9 times 7 is 63, and 1 times 16 is 16, and that will be your final answer. And I know it's positive because we established that in the beginning that our answer is going to be positive. All right, so now we're down to our last 3 questions that we're doing. So it's 600, 800, and 1,000 of the order of operations. So now we have a lot of different things going on here. So now we have to think about our order of operations, which is our PEMDAS. I'm just going to move this off to the side so I have more space if I need it. Oops. So we have our PEMDAS. So remember, the first thing that we need to do is our parentheses. So here I see a lot of parentheses going on. So I need to do my innermost parentheses first. So I need to do 6 minus 9. So we have 3 now times 2 minus 4. And 6 minus 9 is negative 3 squared. Minus 10 divided by negative 2 times 5. Then I need to do my exponent. Well, here we have negative 3 squared. Well, remember, when it's inside parentheses like that, it's saying negative 3 times negative 3, which is a positive 9. So now I have 3 times 2 minus 4 times 9 minus 10 divided by negative 2 times 5. Now I need to go ahead and do the multiplication first inside this parentheses. So I have 3 times 2 minus 36 minus 10 divided by negative 2 times 5. Then 2 minus 36 is negative 34. So we have 3 times negative 34 minus 10 divided by negative 2 times 5. And 3 times negative 34, so positive times negative, I know is negative. And 3 times 34 is going to give me 102. All right, now I have negative 102 minus 10 divided by negative 2 times 5. What a mistake that a lot of people make is they'll do negative 102 minus 10, but you can't do that first. Here we have division and multiplication. And remember, we need to do this order as left to right. So the first thing I need to do is negative 10 divided by negative 2. And negative 10 divided by negative 2 gives me a positive 5. So it now becomes negative 102 plus 5 times 5. And then I need to multiply that negative 102, or that 5 times 5. So negative 102 plus 25. And since the signs are different, I will go ahead and do the larger number minus the smaller one. So then from here, I'll borrow from this 10 to give me a 9. So 7 and 7. And since the larger number was negative, my final answer would be negative. So it's negative 77. All right, so the next question is 12 minus 8/5 plus 3 divided by 2/3 plus 2 times 1/3 divided by 2 times 6/5. So for this problem, before we get started, whenever I see these minus and plus signs, like the addition, subtraction, that's breaking up my problem into different groups and different parts. So I'm just going to focus on each part individually. This first one, 12, there's nothing to do there, so I'm just going to bring that down at the end. Here I have 8/5 plus 3 divided by 2/3. So I need to do my parentheses first, which is everything in here. And within inside my parentheses, I need to do this 3 divided by 2/3 first, which becomes 3 times 3 over 2, which is then 9 over 2. And I have 8 over 5 plus 9 over 2. So I'm going to do this work over here just so I don't run out of space. So 8 over 5 plus 9 over 2. I need common denominators. So I'll multiply this by 2 over 2 and multiply this by 5 over 5. And we get 16 over 10 plus 45 over 10, which is then going to give me 61 over 10. So I'm just going to erase this. So we have 12 minus 61 over 10, which we know is going to change that to a negative sign. So we can just think of it now as 12 minus 61 over 10. And then the last thing I need to do is I need to do this part here. So I see I have a lot going on. So I have multiplying and dividing. So remember, with multiplying and dividing, we need to go left to right. So I need to do 2 times 1/3 first, which is then going to give me 2/3. Then I need to divide by 2. And when we divide with fractions, we need to keep, change, flip. So it's multiplying by 1/2. And in this part, the 2's are going to cancel out. So now I get 1 over 3. And then I still need to multiply by that 6 over 5. And 3 goes into 3 once, and 3 goes into 6 twice. So now we get 2 over 5. So all of that is going to be 2 over 5. So we can add 2 over 5 there. Okay, I'm going to erase some of this work off to the side now. So if you need it, please write it down. But just for space, I'm just going to erase this. And now we just go ahead and need to add them all. Well, we need common denominators. Our common denominator will be 10. So everything is going to be multiplied. Well, that's going to be multiplied by 10 over 10. And this is going to be multiplied by 2 over 2. So we get 120 over 10 minus 61 over 10 plus 4 over 10. And once we have common denominators, we can just add and subtract our numerators. So we can do 120 minus 61, which is then going to give me 59. So now I have 59 over 10 plus 4 over 10, which is going to give me 63 over 10. And that is our final answer. It cannot be reduced at all. And that is it. All right, so for this problem, I'm going to do all the work for the sections over here, and then I'll erase it, and I'm just going to write the answers for each section underneath because there's a lot to do, and there's not that much space. All right, so the first thing we need to do is our parentheses, and our parentheses that we have here, which also is going to include the exponent that we need to do as well. So we need to do 1/2 minus 3/4 squared. So first we need to do what's on the inside of the parentheses. So 1/2 minus 3/4. In order for us to add or subtract fractions, we need a common denominator. So I'll multiply it by 2 over 2, which gives me 2 over 4 minus 3 over 4, which then gives me negative 1 over 4. But this was being raised to the second power. And remember, when we have an exponent, that's saying we're multiplying that number that many times. So negative 1/4 times negative 1/4 is going to give me a positive 1/16. All right, so now I did my parentheses and I did my exponents. So I'm going to move on to the next part. So I'll erase this here. And now remember, when we see our original problem being separated by an addition or a subtraction sign, that's giving us our different parts. So all of this and all of this needs to be done together. So I see all I have is multiplying and dividing in those parts. So I'm going to erase my PEMDAS over here so that this way it's not taking up space. And I'm going to do those parts one by one. So 1/2 divided by 8 times 4 over 5 divided by 7 over 10. So remember, when we're doing multiplying and dividing together, even though our PEMDAS says M before D, it doesn't mean that multiplying comes first. We need to go left to right. So first I'll do 1/2 divided by 8, which becomes 1/2 times 1 over 8, which is 1 over 16. Then I'll bring down this multiplying by 4 over 5. And that 4 and that 16 can reduce because 4 goes into 16 4 and 4 goes into 4 once. So 1 times 1 is 1 and 4 times 5 is 20. Then I'll bring down this divided by 7 over 10, which becomes multiplied by 10 over 7, which 10 goes into 20 twice and 10 goes into 10 once. So now we're left with 1 over 14. So this entire part gives me a positive 1 over 14 in return after I do all the work. And now I'm going to erase this. So I can't erase it, so I'm just going to go ahead and just do this piece by piece. So I see I have a negative and a positive and a positive and a positive, so that means my answer is going to be negative, so I know that. I'm just going to do them piece by piece now. So 25 over 9 times 12 over 10. Well, 3 goes into 9 3 times, and 3 goes into 12 4 times. 5 goes into 25 5 times. 5 goes into 10 twice. And I can still reduce this 2 and this 4 because they're both divisible by 2. So now I got 5 times 2, which is 10, and 3 times 1, which is 3. Now I'm dividing by this 5 over 6, so I need to bring that down. So it's multiplied by 6 over 5. 5 goes into 10 twice, 5 goes into 5 once, 3 goes into 3 once, and 3 goes into 6 twice. So now I'm left with 2 times 2 or 4. And 4 times 1/4 is going to give me just 1. So now I have 1 over 14 minus 1, because we knew it was going to be minus, plus 1 over 16. So from here, we need common denominators. And our common denominator here is going to be, common denominator is 112. So in order to get 14 to 112, I need to multiply it by 8 over 8. So I'm going to do it here. So we get 8 over 112. So minus 112 over 112. And then 16 times 7 will give me 112. So we'll do times 7 over 7. So it gives me 7 over 112. And then we just do 8 minus 112 plus 7. So 8 minus 112 will give me negative 104. Plus 7 is going to give me negative 97. So our final answer will be negative 97 over 112. Sorry that this work got a little bit weird at the end. The screen was freezing and it wasn't updating what I was writing, so I couldn't erase anything. So it's got a little messy there. All right, but that's it for this video.